Perhaps more important, we shifted funds from supplemental war bills to the base budget to ensure that these family programs won't go away when the wars do. Another change is the new GI Bill, approved by Congress last year and just coming online. The generous benefits are a just reward for our service members and a badly needed update to the old GI Bill. Also, for the first time, troops can transfer benefits to family members, an idea I pushed at the suggestion of an Army spouse at Fort Hood. On that point, I should note that I always value meeting with Army spouses because, as you are well aware, they are never afraid to speak their minds. At the same time, we have added funds for the wounded, ill, and injured, traumatic brain injury, and psychological health programs to make sure our troops get the care they need when they return home. This includes a major effort by the Army to educate the force to prevent suicides and address the unseen wounds of war, to approach mental health in much the same way as physical health. The dramatic rise in suicides is a huge concern of mine, and I take heart that the Army is every bit as concerned. The Vice Chief of Staff is spearheading the service's effort to reduce suicide, and I can tell you that it is both General Casey's and General Corelli's personal mission to address this problem. Aside from the conflicts themselves, taking care of our wounded warriors must be our highest priority. The Department of Defense is doing more for military families than it ever has. And yet, when I visit bases around the country, there is often a disconnect. I believe that we must do a better job delivering assistance, especially new programs, to those who need them most. We have to make it easier for them to know what's out there so they can take advantage of these initiatives. Strong recruiting and retention, though influenced by the economy, continue to show the willingness of young Americans to serve. The active Army has surpassed recruiting and retention goals recently, allowing the service to reach its goal of enlarging to 547,000 soldiers earlier this year. And considering the stress on the force and upcoming deployment rotations, I've also authorized a temporary expansion of an additional 22,000 soldiers to get through this high-demand period. This temporary increase will not add new force structure, but will fill out the units we already have. The goal is to end stop loss and increase dwell time. The Army has eliminated most waivers, and this year will exceed 90% for the number of recruits with high school diplomas. And finally, efforts continue to make this a single Army, with the Guard and Reserves receiving the comparable training and same equipment as the active force. Though the pace and types of missions will change, the reserve components' operational responsibilities will continue. Even with all these efforts to mitigate the stress on the force, the reality is that a significant number of soldiers will continue to be deployed for the near and midterm. In fact, right now there are more soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan combined than were deployed to those two countries during the height of the Iraq surge. America's soldiers continue to excel on the battlefield, doing extraordinary things under incredible pressure. As we look to the future, it is the great innovation and shifts in the Army these last few years, institutionally and operationally, that must guide the service going forward. What have we learned in the last few years, and how is it relevant to potential conflicts of tomorrow? The challenge I posed to the Army 2 years ago was to retain the lessons learned and capabilities gained in counterinsurgency and irregular warfare. From all I've seen, heard, and witnessed, that certainly has taken place. In fact, today's Army bears but a passing resemblance to that of 8 years ago, a force mostly designed to repeat another Desert Storm. The Army we have is a supremely adaptable and flexible force, able to deploy rapidly, operate with more autonomy, and slide along the scale of conflict spectrum to confront very different types of threats. Let me give a few examples. First of all, on the technological side, have been tremendous advances in our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. Advances that have led to an unprecedented fusion of intelligence and operations on the ground. Other communications improvements have led to much greater command and control, and more tools to improve this further are getting out to the field. The Army has recognized that the most important part of its procurement strategy is the network, as opposed to the platform. In coming years, there should be revolutionary breakthroughs in the ability of our troops to see themselves, other allied forces, and their adversaries, even if the inevitable fog of war and resourceful enemies prevent us from ever achieving total situational awareness. There have also been entirely new concepts from the war zones. One of the most important is the Advise and Assist Brigade, the AAB, that has three main functions: traditional strike capabilities, advisory roles, and the enablers in command and control to support both functions. In July, I visited the first AAB deployed to Iraq, and I was impressed with the ability to retool a standard brigade combat team in only a few months and with relatively small force augmentation. By the end of next year, we plan for the Iraq mission to be composed almost entirely of AABs, and the expectation is that sometime down the road, the same will be true in Afghanistan. There is, unfortunately, still a lingering view that advisory positions are second-tier jobs, an assumption that needs to be addressed through assignments and promotions. The advisory, train, and equip mission is a key role for the Army going forward, given that America's security will increasingly depend on our ability to build the capabilities of other nations. These capabilities are all the more necessary considering the steep human, political, and financial costs of direct U.S. military intervention. Under the leadership of General Dempsey, the Army also has put its training and doctrine process on a war footing. At the Combined Arms Center, the doctrinal cycle has been reduced dramatically. For example, the AAB doctrine was developed and fielded in only a couple of months, proof that the Army has accelerated its ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. This is a key advantage, not just in counterinsurgency, but in any kind of conflict, where the 75% solution fielded in months is often far better than a 99% solution that might take years. We cannot allow the Army's ability to swiftly adapt at the institutional level to become ossified down the line. Perhaps the greatest change, however, is on the ground level with the men and women on the front lines. Young officers and NCOs at the front have always had to make profound life and death decisions. But in today's conflicts, their responsibilities are even greater and more complex, playing the roles of warrior, diplomat, mayor, economist, city engineer, and tribal liaison, all often at the same time. We must ensure that that kind of mental agility, entrepreneurial spirit, and independent judgment required to be effective downrange carries over into future assignments. It's a safe bet that the leader who thrives in an environment of this complexity can adapt quickly to other missions and other forms of war. But looking forward, we must find a way to retain seasoned young officers and NCOs and give them the opportunities to use these same talents when they move on from combat positions of momentous responsibility to more mundane assignments in the bureaucracy. Their battlefield experience must form the core of an Army prepared to fight wars in the future. That brings me to a larger point. For the last few years, there's been a concern that our force is too focused on counterinsurgency and has lost its edge for complex, conventional operations involving multiple brigades or divisions. The experiences of the British colonial army before World War I and the Israeli military in Lebanon have even been cited. This is a legitimate concern, and we continue to work toward finding the right balance. But the notion that the changes we have seen amount to turning the Army into some sort of counterinsurgency constabulary that is losing its core competencies, above all to shoot, move, and communicate, does not reflect the realities of the current campaigns. Take, for example, the Battle of Sadr City last year. In that campaign, U.S. troops had to synchronize air power, artillery, and ISR, all while maneuvering through an incredibly complex urban environment and coordinating with numerous dispersed units.